This is a Pro Wrestling Illustrated podcast. I am your host, PWI senior writer Al Castle, back once again with my co-host, Brian Solomon.
Hey, Al. I'm okay. How are you?
This is different. We're actually looking at each other because in addition to this being the podcast, the expectation is that this is going to be released as a video because it is a very special episode of the Pro Wrestling Illustrated podcast, and that is because shortly we are going to be joined by our new editor-in-chief, Kevin McElvaney, and also our outgoing publisher, Stu Saks, who by now everybody knows after 41 years is calling it a career in just a few days now. I think early June, he's going to head out of the office for the final time. We hope to do this in person. When I heard about Stu's retirement, my plan all along was to drive down to Pennsylvania, maybe pick Brian up along the way. Obviously, circumstances are keeping that from happening. So we've got the Zoom going on like everybody else, and we're going to have Stu in here in just a moment to look back on a real legendary career and talk a bit about his decision, and also talk to Kevin about what is in store for the future of Pro Wrestling Illustrated. So I'm looking forward to that conversation. Brian, before we get into that, not a ton of news going on with obviously wrestling still kind of being on hold for a while, but a real sad story this week that we would be remiss if we didn't touch on it at least a little, and that's the death of Shad Gaspard, who really tragically died, was swept into the sea while at the beach trying to save his 10-year-old son, who I guess got out too far in the water. There was a couple of days there of uncertainty, and then everybody's kind of what they knew would happen, I think tragically did come to reality when his body washed ashore. Shad was not a huge figure in wrestling, was never a top guy, but really the outpouring, I think, of sentiment towards him really says something about the person, not necessarily the wrestler. By all accounts, just a terrific guy, one of the real true good guys, and maybe also says something about the especially tragic circumstances behind his death. This isn't certainly not a wrestling death as we've come to know it. What are your thoughts on the news?
Yeah, he was a very popular guy, and it is really shocking. I also noticed a lot of the outpouring of love and kind of remembrances from a lot of let's say wrestlers from like the last 20 years or so. There was something that JTG, his former tag team partner, actually posted a couple of days ago. It was really powerful, and it was, I guess, a text that Shad had sent him. I don't know if you saw this.
I did, yeah.
Apropos of nothing, that I guess he had sent to him in January, just saying like, hey, by the way, if I happen to die tomorrow, I just want you to know that, you're my brother and you're my best friend and I love you, or something like that. And it was just this random kind of like thing of just kind of cherish every day. And it seems like he really lived by that. He had an Instagram post too that talked about that, like every day isn't guaranteed, and, make the most of it and all that. And he seems to be someone that just kind of appreciated his life and lived it to the fullest. It's just tragic. I had a friend who lost her father the exact same way when we were kids at the beach, swept away. The father saved her, and then he got dragged under and he drowned. Same exact thing.
Yeah, I'm terrified whenever I go to the beach with my kids, and they go more than just a couple of feet because you take for granted, how powerful the ocean can be. And again, Shad, I don't think he's been in the national wrestling spotlight probably close to 10 years. When he was in WWF, Crime Time was a popular act, a controversial act. It's probably a discussion for another day. But again, they've never really worked on top, and yet the outpouring, and again, understanding some of it are the circumstances of the death, but I really do think it speaks to what a real good dude he was. Not much of an exchange, but I remember being at WrestleCon last year in Manhattan, and when I was registering at the front desk, I think he just showed up to like get changed to work his table. He needed like a change for a certain amount of money, and he was hustling, and this had been 10 years since, again, he'd been really in the spotlight, and he's still very much interacting with fans, and seemed like such a, these convention settings, a lot of times it's a bunch of old timers who clearly don't want to be there. And he just couldn't have been sort of friendlier, more interactive with fans. And the story coming out of this is that he was a hero, but I think there have been stories in the past about, didn't he like stop a robbery or something like that? And and also I remember the details of it, but at one of these conventions, maybe more than once, I remember him like standing. There might have been some kind of like dust up somewhere, and he's the one who intervenes. And he seemed like a guy who was kind of always looking out for other people.
Yeah, and I remember him, because Crime Time was the time that was the time that I was working at WWE, and I do remember he was very well liked. He was very thankful. Like we said, they never were on top, and people can kind of question the gimmick that they were given. And I think they even knew that at the time. Like but he was very gracious about it. Like it was sort of an attitude of, I'm going to make the most of what I've been given. Like it may not be perfect, but I'm in a position now that, there are thousands of guys that would give their arm to be where I am right now. And I'm going to make the most of it. That was really his attitude towards it. I do remember that. And he was just a hard worker and a humble guy, actually. Not at all like his TV character.
Yeah,
really.
Yeah. So anyhow, suffice to say, everybody at the PWI family sends our condolences to his loved ones. Shifting here real quick before we bring in Stu and Kevin, do you want to talk about, I don't get to do this much, actually hold up a copy of the latest issue of Pro Wrestling Illustrated. It is the August 2020 issue with WrestleMania real winners and losers on the cover. That's your feature, Brian. And this is available now, both obviously the print edition and the digital edition. And whichever you pick, go to PWI-online.com and get yours. If you subscribe, you get big discounts over the cover price. You can use that too, like 50% off. And so much in this issue. As I mentioned, this is a WrestleMania coverage issue, and what a WrestleMania was. I mean, really, any year it's a collector's edition because of the WrestleMania coverage. This being such a bizarre year for what WrestleMania was, maybe especially so. But there's features in here about Jacob Fatu, the MLW champion, on Marty Scurll, on Keith Lee. I got to talk to Keith. We hope to feature some of that audio here in the coming weeks. As I mentioned, the WrestleMania 36 real winners and losers, and a My Hot Seat interview with Nyla Rose. And something I think in terms of content in this magazine and what really, really, really makes it, I think, a collector's edition, and we haven't mentioned it much, and certainly it's appropriate now, is the final from the desk of Stu Saks, I believe. Maybe we'll find out otherwise in a bit. But with Stu heading out, he was wrapping it up, and there's some fun pictures. We don't see a whole lot of Stu. There are a lot of pictures throughout his career, historical pictures of him over his 41 years at Pro Wrestling Illustrated, and I think a real touching farewell by him. So you definitely want to check that out. Again, PWI-online.com is the place to go. Also, please follow us on social media at official PWI. That's both on Twitter and Instagram, and you can find us on Facebook as well. You could send us an email at PWI Podcast at outlook.com. Or PWI@capitolpublishing.com for anything related to the magazine or anything else. Please subscribe to the podcast and leave us a positive review wherever you get your podcasts. We want to thank Podbean for hosting us for all these years. What else? The t-shirts. I got mine. You've got yours. In a second, you'll see Kevin's got his. He is Team SmackDown. We are Team Raw, obviously. And you can get them at ProWrestlingTees.com. And there's a few other designs now too. We've got an Inside Wrestling shirt, the wrestler shirt. So whichever you like, ProWrestlingTees.com is the place to go. Father's Day is coming up, so for the wrestling fan in your life, absolutely a good gift for him. So why don't we bring in now Kevin and Stu, if they would turn on their cameras. Hello.
Hi.
Hey. Thanks for joining us, guys. Real quick, so you guys are in the office.
We're in separate parts of the office, yes.
How long have you guys been back in the office?
Stu's been here.
I've never left.
Yeah.
I've never left. We are, as publishing, we are an exception to the stay-at-home order. So we were given the option here at Kappa to either come into the office or work from home. And Kevin worked from home for a good chunk of time, but I wanted to get him in here just a little bit before I finally left, so that we can go over some of the finer details face to face. So he's now in the office, but working in the empty art department.
Yeah, I mean, just bizarre. I can't imagine that either you could anticipate that these would be the circumstances behind, this passing of the torch. We'll get into all that in a moment. Did want to go over a couple things. So July 1979, Stu, the top song on the charts was Bad Girls by Donna Summer. Dracula was #1 in movie theaters.
Not the Bela Lugosi one, right?
No, which one was it? Would you know better than this? Was not a very good Dracula.
It was the Frank Langella one.
Oh, yeah. Yes, Skeletor. That's what I know him. Jimmy Carter was in the White House. Madison Square Garden, I don't know if you went to this, Stu, hosted its first ever 8-man tag team match, which was a 3 out of 5 falls match. Andre the Giant, Ivan Putski, Tito Santana, and Dominic DeNucci defeated Jimmy, Johnny, and Jerry Valiant, and Captain Lou Albano. And also the WWF Championship was on the line when Bob Backlund retained against Pat Patterson by countout. So that was all 41 years ago. Also in July of 1979, a young Stony Brook graduate joined the Weston Wrestling magazines. And 41 years later, you're calling it a career. We want to get into that. Before we do, and you hear from all of us, I think we've got some messages. We're going to hear from some other folks, right, Kevin?
All right, here we go.
Yeah, Craig, listen, people know that me, Bill Apter, I'm on a lot of shows and all that, but they didn't know that I still talk to Craig Peters. So did you hear that Stu Saks is retiring?
I did hear. I think it's amazing that Al is devoting this special episode of the podcast to Stu. And, I've worked with you, Bill, for 15 years and Stu for those same 15 years. And, boy, there's a great bunch of stories.
Oh, I've got stories about Stu. I mean,
you know what? Tell the podcast listeners the story about when Steve Farhood wrote that Izzy Slapowicz column.
Oh, that was
this is a great story.
That was classic. That was classic. Steve Farhood had never been to a temple before, to a Jewish.
And then there was the time that Stu and his wife Darlene pulled the lottery ticket gag on our production manager Carl Robick.
Oh yeah,
It's a great story.
That's let me tell you that story. So Stu and Darlene got a ticket, and it wasn't a winning ticket, and they.
And then listeners, you can't believe it. You have to hear the story about Stu and Dan Shockett and going to the apartment wrestling matches.
Oh, the apartment wrestling. Oh, okay. So Stu always said that he never had any involvement in apartment wrestling.
Oh, speaking of involvement, there was that time when he was involved in this wiffle ball game in the office, and it hit an ashtray. And remember that story?
Yeah, that was with Stan Stasiak. Okay, so Stan Stasiak came up to the office, and
you know what, Bill? I gotta say something. In 15 years that I've worked with you, you know what your problem is?
What?
You never finish a story.
It's been nice working with you, Stu.
Any reactions to that, Stu, before we go on?
Craig knows that that's my favorite bit that the two of them do.
I got to see it in person last year.
Oh my goodness, it is classic. And every one of those stories, almost every one of those stories has a real origin. And we can get into a couple of them if you want later on. But yeah. it was great working with those guys. We had a blast. I'm telling you, there was never a dull moment. And I never anticipated working as a wrestling writer or a wrestling editor as for my career, but working in that office environment, it just sealed it. There was no reason to leave. It was just so much fun. Like they say, if you love your job, you never work a day in your life. Well, I guess that would be absolutely true of this job. So that's it. I'll see you guys.
There's a couple more of those.
Yeah, we got a couple more. Let's get back to them.
Hello, this is Harry Burkett with Pro Wrestling Illustrated. I want to wish my boss, Stu Saks, a very happy retirement after 41 years with PWI. I go back 37 years with Stu, starting out as a reader and a big fan of his, and to be able to transition and become a writer, working alongside him, has been a big thrill in my life. And I appreciate everything you passed along to me and everything I've learned. Happy retirement, and thank you very much.
Harry was awesome. Harry is awesome. He's still with us. Harry,
he still gives a damn. He's not abandoning us.
Oh my goodness. There were 2 times that we actually hired Harry to work as an editor in the office, and it was great. But he got homesick for Girdletree, Maryland, and he just had to get back home, and so that. It didn't. He was always the consummate freelance writer, because he was so clean. You didn't have to do a thing to his stories. They came, and because he had the whole sensibility of what we do here in the office. And this isn't a knock on any of you other guys, but it came with a headline, with a blurb, with all the little things that we have to do here to send the story and prepare it for the art department. Harry had that all together for me. So reading his stories is like just like a gift. And he's such a great writer too. And nobody could pull in the history of wrestling into modern times like Harry could. That's his specialty. And I'll still read PWI, and I hope all you guys are still doing your columns for a very, very long time.
Harry would be the longest tenured writer in the history of the magazine, wouldn't it?
Yeah, I would say so. He said 37 years.
I think some of that might be like as a fan, right?
I think he wrote a. If I'm not mistaken, I think he's told the story. I don't recall this, but when we used to do wrestling 83, 84, 85, we had letters to the editor, but we had one lengthy opinion piece from a reader, and I think Harry wrote one of those, and that was his start. But I think the way he came to the magazine was through another publication that we did here, which was called Remember, which had nothing to do with wrestling. It was a nostalgia magazine, and Harry loved the magazine. And then he looked in the staff box and he saw all those familiar names, and I think he started with, if I'm not mistaken, I think he wrote a piece for Remember, and then that transitioned into the wrestling magazines.
Yeah, because I know Dan joined, I think, in 97 and left the magazine last year, and Harry, I think, was around before Dan, right? So
I think so, yeah.
Yeah, so he's pushing at least 25 years or more as part of the team. And is there one more, Kevin?
Yeah, there's one more.
Now this guy's got everybody beat, right, in terms of how long he's been around?
Yeah, that's true. Let's hear from the other individual.
This is this is Matt Brock, and I just want to say that Stu Saks retiring. I never thought the little punk would retire before me, but I wish him luck. 41 years, just getting started, but he did a heck of a job, and I wish him luck. Take care, Stu.
That guy
sounds great.
That's fishy.
For his age, he sounds terrific.
It does. He's got a little bit of a problem there with his digestive system, I guess you could say.
Yeah, but we don't judge.
Yeah.
Better hitting the bottle, maybe, could be.
Well, he's on the road so much. I mean, it's how
Yeah, true.
he gets by. We can't judge him too much.
Thank
Anyhow,
you.
Stu.
That was fun. That was fun.
Yeah, there might be more coming your way, so I'll send them along as they come in. So Stu, again, it's been 41 years, just crazy circumstances. Again, you couldn't have imagined this is the way it would end. So can you talk a bit about, how bittersweet that is, that, I'm sure you hoped for the big retirement party, the send off, all that. What's it like retiring under these circumstances?
There's something missing, and to not have my coworkers with me, and I'd say everybody in any editorial department of the company except for Kevin and me are working from home at this point. So and my boss is working from home. That's Des McNulty, the president. A good chunk of the people, and even some of the people are just kind of, you can't go into accounting. They have a bin outside their area. You just drop stuff in and back away. You can't go in. You can't talk. So you see people walking through the office with their masks on, but it's just so odd, and it's like, no, it's not the way I envisioned things happen. I kind of thought there might be a cake, so we're gonna have to do a virtual cake, and it's a little bit sad, but it doesn't change the fact, that as of June 5th, I won't see these people on a regular basis anyway. I'm still gonna be in the area for a while, and I'm sure I'll stop by and see people when things get back to normal, and we'll have some things to talk about, and it's a little sad.
Why the decision to keep coming in every day?
I just feel safe. We're permitted to come in. I'm working completely in an area by myself. It's just what I'm used to. It's what I've done for all these years. And I think my wife is going to see enough of me after June 5th. So, I'll just give her a little bit more time to before that happens on a daily basis.
Yeah. So what do you expect is going to be like on June 5th when you walk out of the office for the final time? I mean, do you anticipate that it's going to be emotional for you, or have you already kind of put some of this behind you?
I think it's hard to say what it's going to feel like when I leave the office on that day. I think I would have felt very uneasy if we hadn't set things up for the magazine to go forward without a hitch. And I think that with hiring of Kevin and the amazing quick learner that he is, and the fact that he had experience with the magazines for all these years and knew all the freelancers and knew what PWI was about, the transition has been just unbelievable. Even though we were apart from a good chunk of the period where he would be learning the ins and outs of what we do here. So just knowing that the magazine is in good hands and that it's going to go forward without a hitch really makes me very comfortable. And I think that takes a lot of the angst out of it, because the magazine's been a part of my life for a good almost 41 years. And that's, you put yourself into it, you put a lot into the magazine, and to see it go to somebody who I wasn't sure about would have been just I just wouldn't have been comfortable with that. But I just have a really, really good feeling of what's going to happen in the months and years to come.
Yeah. So what's behind the decision? I was with you, I think less than a year ago, and we were celebrating the 40th anniversary of Pro Wrestling Illustrated. At the time, you said, it wasn't quite on your radar.
I lied.
You lied. So what I know in your latest and what I believe is your last column, you touched on it. But why after 41 years is this the right time?
I think I just want to experience life without having the pressures of schedules and deadlines. And you start that at a very, very young age while you're in school. There's always you have to do this, you have to do this, you have to do this. And I just want to, you know, I'm 64 years old. You know, the time was going to come soon anyway, but I wanted to just see what life was like without having to do things. And, you know, I think my enthusiasm for the job was starting to wane a little bit. You know, I've been at this for a very long time, and I don't want to say it would be stupid to say it's getting old, because there's always a new experience every day. You know, there's always a new challenge, but you know, I think it's just time to pass the torch to somebody who was a little bit more enthusiastic about all this than I am at this moment.
How much of losing that, some of that enthusiasm is about wrestling itself, right? I mean, I think we could all agree that you do this job the best when you really are a fan of the sport, right? And I know once upon a time, and you talk about how you began your career, you were at the matches, and you showed me some of this stuff. I mean, writing longhand match results and all this stuff. So certainly a younger Stu Saks was as big a fan of wrestling as there was. You've acknowledged that you've pulled back some in recent years. So is that something to do with it, that you just can't get into wrestling as much as you did when you were younger?
I think so. You couldn't have been more of a wrestling fan than I was when I was maybe, you know, 13, 14, 15 years old. I was a crazy person for wrestling. I spent hours in the library just going through microfilms and looking for the Madison Square Garden results so I could print them out and keep them. Why? I have no idea. You know, I loved it so much that's what I would do. My grandmother lived in Florida, and she would send me all the match clippings from the Florida newspapers. And I would, like you said, I would take longhand detailed results, and I'd started to do my own wrestling newsletter when I was 14 or 15 years old. I shared a room with my brother who hated wrestling, and he was like, "Oh, you're not putting that on again." But I did, and I had to set up the UHF antenna so that I can get channel 47 from it would come in really snowy, and I would watch wrestling from the Olympic Auditorium on channel 41 on Saturdays, and I couldn't get enough of it. And if I had that same feeling right now, I probably would do this until I was Matt Brock's age. But yeah, you just lose a little bit of it after a while, and you know, I think the magazine deserves to have somebody who has that kind of enthusiasm that I might have had when I was a youngster. You know, it's unrealistic to think that anybody would be as crazy as I was back then, but I really do think that Kevin has a lot more love for wrestling at this point than I do, and the readers deserve to have somebody who could, you know, who has that feeling inside of them still.
And,
Brian,
and
you want to jump in,
Stu, yeah, Stu, what was it like to see Frank Gotch live at that time? Was it like this day, or, you know?
Well, he was in college at the time, right?
Oh, okay.
But I did get to interview him, and he was a very nice man.
Did you really?
And oh yeah, he was great.
Wow.
He
died in 1913. So.
Okay, I've got my my timeline wrong.
Oh, then I must be thinking of Carl Gotch then.
Now I think George Hackenschmidt you might have been able to interview, because he didn't die till about 1960. So, you know,
nobody knows history. I take it back what I said about Harry. I think you know wrestling history better than anybody, especially the NWA.
I wrote the book, you know. No, but I want to say on that, you know, you mentioned, Stu, in your last column about how you started, you know, like you were running a fan club.
Right.
And I don't know if you remember this, but I guess about a year or two ago, I was going through some of my wrestling magazines, like from the 70s, I guess, some old ones that I had. And in the fan club section, I saw your fan club in there with your name. And I mean, was like, I don't know, maybe like early 70s or something. and I sent you a picture of it, because I was just like, I know you had said that before, but seeing it in print, it's just like made it all so real. I was like, wow, he really did have a fan club back then.
Right. I see those in our magazines. So if I go into our own archives and I go back into those years, I could see, Bill Apter ran the fan club column, and he would advertise my little wrestling newsletter in there. And that's kind of fun. And just the other day, Jason Conlon, who was our cartoonist, sent me a letter to the editor that I wrote for Wrestling Monthly. And so I now have that, which was kind of cool, complaining about the New York State Athletic Commission.
Well, when I started reading PWI when I was in high school, and which is probably like, well, at that time, I think probably I started about maybe like 90, 91 reading it. And I just got such a sense back then of like, it just seemed like, I don't know what it was, like the coolest place in the world to work. Like when I was a teenager, I just thought like, my God, these guys, they hang out in this office. They talk about wrestling, like they write about wrestling. They get to go to the matches. And when I was in college, I actually started, I'm not going to hold this against you, Stu, but I started sending samples of my writing out to like every wrestling magazine that I could think of that was out there. Like I sent stuff to George Napolitano, and like I think Vince Russo was running WWF magazine at the time. And I sent them like all this like stuff I wrote in college, like for the paper, and I sent stuff directly to you. And I remember thinking like, of all the places, that was the one where I wanted to work the most. I was like, please, please, please. Now I wound up going to work at WWE magazine, which was way more corporate, I have to say, than anything I imagined what being at PWI was like. Like I know Frank would always tell me, like Frank would confirm it, like how much fun, Frank Fatucci, how much fun it was to work at the PWI offices. So I was always very jealous of you, Stu.
Well, I remember your letters and your samples were so good that I couldn't hire you because I knew that you would take my job away from me. So I just couldn't do that. That was
ultimately Kevin did that.
Right.
Guess my samples weren't as good as Brian.
Go ahead.
Brian touches on, and even by your accounts, it was such a fun time, right, back then when you're talking about the days in Rockville Center and all that, and then there in the mid-'90s you move over to Pennsylvania. Do you see it as kind of like two different chapters in your career? And I've got to think that, realistically speaking, the last 25 years or so, which is most of your career at the magazines, couldn't have been as fun as those first, whatever it was, 15 or so, right?
Now, it became work.
Mm-hmm.
It was work back then, but we had a lot more time to do the things that we wanted to do. We had time to play poker or Stratomatic baseball at the end of the day, or wiffle ball, or whatever it was. There was nobody. This is more of a corporate kind of environment, and there it was just like kids playing, and but the kids did their homework. They got the stuff done, and then they played. So we never came close to missing a deadline. We had a lot of product back then, but we were able to still have a really, really good time. And I'm not saying that we're not having a good time here. It was just a different atmosphere. And those were the days, I have to say, in terms of the camaraderie, the joy of working as a young group and pooling our creative ideas together to try to come up with magazines. When you're young like that, we were just all out of college. We always looked at Bill as the old man, and he was maybe, he was maybe 30. I was 23, and Steve Farhood was, maybe a year younger than me, and Craig came in, and he was maybe 2 years younger than me. It's kind of a unique situation to have all those young, enthusiastic people who really are just trying to find their way in journalism and the wrestling business, and the combination of the two. And I can't tell you how much fun we had. It was fantastic. And some of when Bill and Craig were doing their bit, I could hear little starts and stops of stories that, things that actually happened. And it was, like, I'll just give you one example. They talked about the fake lottery ticket. You have time?
Absolutely.
Okay. We had a production manager named Carl Lovick, and nobody knows who Carl Lovick is, but they all know his picture because he was his face with a visor over his eyes was the picture of Matt Brock. Okay, so he was Matt Brock. All right. Now Carl, he was the production manager, but didn't have an awful lot to do during the day. He would put together the Western and detective magazines with all film and pickup material that we ran for years and years and years. So he didn't have a lot to do. And he was very obsessed with houses. He owned houses and rented them and refurbished them, and very, very obsessed with the lottery. And so there was one point, the New York lottery got up to, I don't know how many millions of dollars, but it was like at a record level. And Carl spent the entire day just trying to get different people to pool their resources to buy lottery tickets so we can get as many as we could. And the night of the lottery, we knew that none of our tickets came in. So Darlene and I, my wife and I, we both worked there. Darlene was an artist who I met on the job. We came into work the next day, but before we did, we stopped at a stationery store or a luncheonette, and we picked up a lottery ticket, and we bought it with the winning numbers, so that the lottery ticket would have the right numbers on it, but it would be a week old. So we bought the lottery ticket and came into the office, and Darlene sat on the side of the office with the art department where Carl worked, and said, and she said to Carl, Stu and I bought a ticket. Can you just see if we won anything? He goes, no, we didn't win anything. You didn't win anything. Nobody wins anything. You forget about it. And she says, come on, Carl, I'm really busy. Can you just take a look at the numbers? He says, all right. He goes, all right. You needed 6 to win the grand prize. There was no like additional numbers or whatever they have now. So it was you got 1 number. You got 2 numbers. You got 3. You got 4. You won money. You got 5 numbers. You got 6. You're a millionaire. And he was absolutely convinced that we were now millionaires. And he goes over to Ken Morgan, who was the art director, and Darlene's boss, says, she quits. She doesn't need this place anymore. And he comes running over to my side of the building, and that's my wife calling now. Gotta call you back.
Get on speaker.
Okay. So he comes running over to my side of the building and goes, Stu, you guys won. You're a millionaire. You're a millionaire. And Bill Apter says, let me see that ticket. And he takes a ticket and he pretends to rip it up. And Carl calls him an expletive. And then finally, everybody's in on this except for Carl. And we're all cracking up, but he's not seeing this. And finally, Darlene felt bad. And she says, Carl, check the date of the ticket. What? Check the date of the ticket. And he finally realized that he's been duped. And he wouldn't talk to us for a week. He says, I was going to borrow money from you guys. But he was, oh man, we had a blast with that. And we'll never forget that forever. That was a great story.
That is mean. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, something that we would talk a whole lot about is that, as you mentioned, you met your wife here. So, I mean, I imagine that's another reason for you to be grateful for these last 41 years, right?
That's exactly right. I think everything that I have in life is somewhat connected to this job, and where I'm living, the friends I now have, just all the experiences, everything. It's just all connected to the job. But the one thing that I'll take away that's the most important is the fact that I met the love of my life, my soulmate, at the job. She was hired after like maybe 3 or 4 years after I was, as a graphic artist, and I I was smitten to begin with, and she was very, very attractive, and I wanted among everybody else wanted to get her attention, and I didn't really know how to do it. I'm a little shy with girls, so I didn't know what to do, but I knew I wanted to get her attention before somebody else did. So, and I wrote about this in my column. The way the Freeport office was set up, the art department was on one side, and she had to walk across the editorial department to get back to where the typesetter set the type and made the galleys for them to paste up in the art department. And she used to send Ken Morgan, the art director, to get the type because she didn't want to walk across where all these guys were going to look at her. And so finally Ken said to her, "You're going to have to go eventually. I can't do this for you every time." So she's walking across, she gets the type, she's walking back, and I could hear her going clip, clop on the tile floor. So that was my opportunity. I said, "Excuse me, do you have to make so much noise?" "What?" she says. I said, "You're kind of making a lot of noise. We're trying to work here." And she says, "Oh, does it bother you?" And then she does, like she gets up, she does a jig on the floor, makes all the noise, and then runs out. So she goes home that night, and her mother says, "So how do you like the working there?" And she goes, I love the people." And she goes, "Except there's this one guy who I really don't like, and I'll probably wind up marrying him." That's a true story.
That's great. Wow. That was 30 something years ago, right? How many years now?
Yeah, we were married almost 36 years.
Yeah, that's great.
Very happily. And I'm just very grateful that she's the best thing that I took out of this job. So before you make me cry, go on to another one.
You've mentioned Bill a couple times, and I think for most people, certainly who read the magazines in the 70s and 80s and 90s, he was sort of the face of Pro Wrestling Illustrated. I think it's fair to say that most fans of the magazine don't even know what you look like, right? I mean, that's one of kind of the running jokes is Stu Saks even a real person, right? So you've kept this low profile for all those years. Was that deliberate on your part? Do you have any regrets about maybe not being out there more, going to more shows, meeting more wrestlers, whining and dining and schmoozing the way Bill has?
Not really, because Bill was very comfortable doing that kind of thing, and I never really was. I'm kind of a shy, reserved guy, and I'm very content to kind of sit in the background and do the grunt work. And Bill was just so overflowing with personality, and being able to get out there, endear himself to the wrestlers and the wrestling promoters. Nobody could do that better than him. Bill went out. Craig went out. Another guy who had all the personality in the world, and they loved doing it. So you can't send everybody. So it was the right thing to do. And Bill's importance to the magazine went far beyond his what he brought to the table as a photographer and as a writer and as a senior editor. The business, we depended on the backtrack. Wrestling, more so in those days, was such a closed business that you needed somebody who was on the inside to be able to gain the trust of those who were in power, and whether it be the wrestlers or the promoters. And Bill was such a nice guy and a trustworthy guy that they trusted him with that, with coming into the inner circle and being what he eventually became. So that was his job. He was good at it, and I didn't see any reason to try to encroach on that.
Why did you stick around so long? I mean, you talk about like all these names, Craig and Bill, and they all moved on, as did pretty much everybody you worked with in those early years. You stuck around 41 years. Why in that time? I'm sure opportunities came your way, or you could have pursued opportunities. Why did you stick around?
Well, I had a little taste of what the life of a newspaper person would be. And that's what I wanted. I wanted to cover the Knicks as their beat writer. I mean, something along those lines. I wanted to be a sports writer for a daily newspaper. And then I got to work at a daily newspaper as a part-timer for several years. And I saw what their lifestyle was. And it's difficult. You know, you're working nights and weekends and holidays, you know, and, you know, when
Tell me about it.
Yeah. I'm sure you know, when you should be home with your family enjoying a Thanksgiving dinner, you know, you're out writing a story, and the glamour of being a newspaper writer was like, it's sort of like, this may not be for me. So when I at London Publishing, it was a 9-to-5 job, 5 days a week, and you're off on holidays, and you get to actually live a normal life. And even with that, I didn't think I would be there for an extended period of time, but it was like I've said before, it was such a great working environment that I would have been a fool to leave it. And then as time went on, I got more responsibilities. And then the person who hired me, Peter King, left the company in 1987. And I was put in as editor-in-chief, basically running the whole editorial operation. And with it came, you know, a little bit more money and, you know, the responsibility that I wanted. The working environment was great. The subject matter, you know, you're writing about wrestling. That's not a bad thing. So there really was no reason for me to leave. So I kept going.
Did you ever think about or have the opportunity to actually get a job in wrestling as far as working for WWE? Was that ever on your radar?
No, I was never ever approached by them. I know certain people who I actually heard the Busted Open radio show the other day, and they did a tribute to the glory days of the wrestling magazines. And I heard that, I didn't even know this, that George Napolitano was offered a position with WWF at the time. I know that Bill was in discussions with them for a period of time, but they never came to me. So yeah. Not that I would have taken it. I was not happy where I was.
When I was working there, Stu, I remember one time, if I remember it correctly, that you came to the office. I didn't get to introduce myself or meet you, but I was working for Barry Werner at the time, who was the publisher of WWE magazine. And I remember him saying that he had a meeting with you in the office, I guess, to talk about doing like a big cover story with Triple H, if I remember right, or something like that. And I just remember regretting that I didn't know about it because I didn't have a chance to introduce myself to you because I, you know, like read the magazine for so many years. Do you remember that?
I do. It was one of the most awkward meetings I've ever had in my life. Now, Barry was nice enough, okay, but we weren't coming there to talk to Barry. It was myself and Dave Lenker, okay? He was the editor-in-chief. We were coming to meet with Linda McMahon, and I don't remember why. I don't remember the reason we came. Maybe it was just because we just wanted to get to know her. I never met her before, and you know, the magazines were the magazines and WWF were starting to build a relationship at the time, and I wanted to get to know her a little bit. So when we got there, somehow that didn't happen, and I never met her. And they brought us into Barry's office, and we sat down, and they said, "Okay, you'll meet with Barry Werner." And I'm like, "Okay, I don't really have anything to talk to Barry about. He's, you know, I knew his background a little bit, and we talked about some mutual acquaintances."
He was a newspaper guy too.
Yeah, he was the Daily News sports editor for years.
Yes, he was. And I knew somebody who worked at the Daily News, and we talked about that for a few minutes. But then we just kind of sat there looking at each other and not knowing what to say. And, you know, finally, after a while, Dave and I said, "Well, it was really nice of you to sit and meet with us. You know, I know that you were kind of thrown into this situation without really being prepared to talk about anything, but it was, you know, it's nice to meet you and just, you know, thank you." And we left.
It's funny because I could tell you the other side of that, because I remember hearing about it from Barry, and he was, I think, just as confused as you guys were. Like, he had no idea the meeting was happening. And I remember, Barry has like this heavy New York accent, and I remember him coming out later in the day and sitting down with them being like, I just had the weirdest meeting with Stu Saks from PWI, and I don't even know why, and all he wanted was to do an interview with Triple H. I don't know why they had to come all the way up here just to talk about that, but it was nice to meet him, I guess. Like, he was just mystified.
Right. And I don't remember the Triple H aspect of it at all.
Yeah, that's what he said, that you guys wanted to do like a big cover story interview, like photo shoot or whatever with him. And it was almost like you were looking for like his blessing to do it or something. Like, I don't know.
Maybe I had a sense that Triple H would gain power within the company, and I wanted to get to know him.
Well, that was a good relationship to create, I guess. Yeah. I wonder if it was the 500, because I remember him being number one way back when, and us trying to get an interview and ultimately getting an interview with him.
I think that might have been it, actually. Yeah. Maybe that was it. Yeah, this was like, I want to say like 02, 03, like that. Something.
That sounds
like
about right.
Yeah.
But it was kind of cool going to the Titan Tower. I've been there a couple of times since, and it's kind of it's a neat place to be. I would, I've met with several people there, and you mentioned Frank Vitucci. He worked here for a very, very long time.
Yeah.
And then he took a job there, which was a great thing for him, obviously.
He's still there.
Yeah, he's still there, and
a survivor. Yeah,
he's a survivor. In fact, the other day, I got a package delivered to the office, and I opened it up, and it was quite a nice surprise, and it came from WWE, and it was a nice note from Frank talking about our the relationship between us, and our personal relationship, and the magazines with WWE, and a nice little trinket came with it. Hang on one second.
Oh my goodness! Wow!
Talk about burying the lead, dude. Burying the lead. Wow.
It's very classy. Yeah.
Finally, boy.
How would you describe your relationship with WWE over all these years? I mean, I know there was probably kind of a rough patch there, at least in the 80s, but just as a bystander, my sense is in the last several years, there has been a relationship there, even outside of what we see on the business side. Maybe it's not that unusual for some text to go back and forth between you and some people in influence there. So has that really grown over the years?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. I'll start at the beginning. In the beginning, everything was just, I'll just put this aside. In the beginning, everything was just like you would expect it to be. We would call for credentials to go shoot wrestling at Madison Square Garden, and Bill and I would go in, and we would set up the two of us at ringside and shoot away, and they appreciated the coverage from the magazines, because there was no other coverage from anywhere else. But then in the, I think it was 83, we called up, to confirm our credentials, and Bill was told that you're no longer welcome here. And WWF was beginning their own magazine, and Vince McMahon was intent on capturing that aspect of the cash flow, the revenue. The magazines were pretty profitable, and he didn't like the idea that we were making money on their backs. So he started his own magazine, and it was not pleasant. They cut us off entirely. We were not to photograph wrestling matches. We weren't even allowed to come into the arenas with cameras. Now everybody's got their cell phone, takes pictures. Most of them take video, whatever. They were very strict about people coming in with anybody coming in with cameras, for the fear that the magazines would get pictures, and they didn't want us to have that. So we had to do some things to try to keep ourselves going. We couldn't just throw in the towel and say, all right, Vince, it's all yours. We're going to just cash in our chips and not produce wrestling magazine anymore. No, we continued to do it. We did whatever we had to do to get photos, and it was, we the whole 1980s rise of wrestling and the Rock and Wrestling Connection should have been like a bonanza for us, and it was. But it could have been that much more if we had the cooperation of WWF and were able to get the types of photos that we really needed to do what should have been done. So, excuse me, as we got into the 90s, things started to change a little bit. And Bill after had a relationship with Jay Andronico, who was their PR director. And they started to need a couple of things from us, occasionally a picture, and we would say, okay, maybe you could open up a little bit for us. And slowly but surely, we were able to start shooting some shows. It got to the point now where the relationship is just phenomenal. Whatever we need, they could either supply us or we could shoot ourselves. We're not permitted to shoot any televised event, but any house show we could shoot. We could shoot any event from a secondary position with a long lens, but they supply us with photos. We continue to supply them with photos. And personally, I have a relationship with Stephanie and Paul Levesque. I have no relationship with Vince whatsoever. In fact, it's hard. I told this to Paul Levesque. I said I've never really met Vince McMahon, which being in this business for as long as I have, he just could not believe it. He says that's impossible. That can't be. Well, I said I have to take it back. I did meet him once. I was back somehow. I got backstage at Madison Square Garden at like 17 years old because I was with this guy who was doing a wrestling radio show in New York, and somehow he arranged things so that we would be in the backstage at Madison Square Garden. So we're standing there, and I'm a young guy, and Vince, who was obviously not in the position of power that he is right now, saw us there, and he goes, "What are you guys doing here?" And I said, "Well, we work with the radio station." He goes, "Get out." That was it. That was my only face-to-face with Vince McMahon after all these years.
Yeah. Let's talk to Kevin a little bit. That's another part of this story. You are the future of the magazine, kind of the next chapter here. Take me to getting that call. I imagine it came from Stu. When did that call come? What was your reaction? How much soul-searching thought did it take to accept the offer?
Yeah, so I mean, I guess the initial conversation started last fall at some point. It was very hush-hush. Not a lot of people here knew what was going on at the CAP offices. Stu, even if I recall, stepped out to call me on his cell phone in the parking lot. So I knew that was unusual. But yeah, essentially told me that he was going to be retiring and would I potentially be interested. He thought that I might make a good fit for it. He was very like you can't say anything about this. You can't tell anybody. And then, it kind of gradually happened but of course I was interested immediately. Like, yeah, that would be a dream. Tried not to act too excited, but I was, positively buzzing after this. And then, over the course of a couple of months, I eventually formally applied, came in here, had to speak to some other people, and then, was offered the job and was, of course, super excited to accept it. I mean, it's a dream for me. I've been reading the magazine and the sister magazines that are now defunct since I was a child. I mean, even younger than what Brian was saying. I mean, probably around the same time period, but I would have been in early elementary school at that point. Not calling you old, Brian, but I guess I did just sort of call you old. Yeah, so I mean, even here now, it feels kind of surreal, like a beautiful, unlikely dream. But here I am in the office. I mean, like as Stu mentioned, we're in different parts of the office for safety's sake right now, but it's great. And I've been learning so much. I'm going to keep learning. It's a shame Stu isn't going to be here longer because there's just as much as he said that I'm learning quickly, he's such a wealth of knowledge and knows so much and retains so much and has really quick recall with everything too. Just right away can tell me this or that about the history of the magazine. Oh yeah, I'm pretty sure we covered this, or we didn't do that, or yeah, there's a few photos back in the archives there. It's he's made clear that I can call him up after he's retired, but I don't want to go to that well too often. He deserves a break. He deserves to not have those deadlines.
Yeah. It's one thing to learn the ins and outs of, here's how you use whatever, computer system, publishing system, and here are our deadlines for this. It's another thing, again, to establish the relationships and have that wealth of knowledge that Stu's developed over 41 years. So how intimidating is that? I mean, you talk with somebody who acknowledges that he's text friends with Stephanie and Triple H, right? And
right.
As well he should after 41 years.
Sure.
So how intimidating is moving into that part of the job?
Yeah, it's a little overwhelming. I mean, obviously working with the magazine for so many years, I've conducted my share of interviews and spoken to people, wrestlers, people who work behind the scenes. But yeah, that's a whole new level, establishing these personal relationships. And Stu has been kind enough to, through dribs and drabs, introduce me to the people I need to speak to. I haven't spoken to Triple H or Stephanie yet, but certainly to other people who work within WWE who've been very helpful. And then people within other organizations. And it's really cool to get to know these people and to establish those relationships. And obviously I want to be very careful not to do anything to damage those great relationships that Stu has built over all these years. So that's, a little bit nerve wracking, but I'm up to it. And I mean, really the truth of the matter is that Stu did such a great job of getting those relationships to where they are in the first place. I think I would have to almost work to damage them, but it's.
And you've just been on the job for a few weeks, and I've said it on the podcast a number of times. You really kind of hit the ground running in terms of putting your mark on things, stuff like this, these video roundtables. You got our YouTube channel up and running, which something that I wanted to do for a long time. Bringing back the PWI weekly newsletter. So was it a conscious decision on your part, again, right out of the gate? I want to put my stamp on things. You have to be careful, especially while Stu's still around, not to overstep, not to kind of change things around too much.
Yeah, it's a balancing act. I mean, I remember one of the early conversations we had was I always insisted that the word independent should be shortened as INDIE, because that's how it's done in the worlds of music and film. But we've always done INDY. It's a really nerdy stylistic point, but if you've been reading the magazine for years or writing for it, obviously, that's how it's been done. And that's, I think, a certain section of the wrestling industry at large has done it that way because we do it. I kind of said, Stu, I maybe this is something I do after you leave. I don't want to press an issue immediately, like 2 days in here, but I'm here writing this, and I really think it should be INDIE. And he said, well, yeah. I mean, like we had a conversation about it. I talked him into it, but I didn't want to come in and try and rewrite everything because it's worked so well, and I want to be careful about changes that I do make. And something like the weekly to me made sense because it's an institution that people do ask about and they do miss. And it seemed like an easy way to bring it back was to do it as this free newsletter that, we can largely, I mean, to pull back the curtain a little bit, I largely put it together myself.
Entirely.
Yeah, entirely. Although when I was at home and there was something we needed from the archives, Stuart had to pull that for me. I wasn't going to necessarily come in just to, especially during the first few weeks of the shutdown when people really didn't know just how dangerous things were, what precautions you should be taking. But it's not a huge imposition for us, to if we were to bring that back as a paper publication, that would be a whole other matter. There's cost associated with that. But to me, it made sense to do that and bring that brand back and give it away to people for free. And I mean, that keeps us in touch with our readers. It hopefully helps us make some, I can actually say it has helped us make some new readers already. So, or at least get connections back with former readers. So I'm pretty proud of that. Yeah, I mean, there's going to be some things that change over time. I mean, Stu and I think a little differently about some things, but I mean, I have to have respect for what he's built at the same time, and he knows this readership a lot better than I do, and I have to trust his instincts. And we've had a few conversations like that already where I've come around on things because, well, Stu knows. It's really as simple as that.
I think you're an interesting person to have on the job because I think you're the youngest person here on this Zoom meeting. You have different sensibilities. I think as a younger person, as a millennial, right? And some of it I've witnessed come up over the years on some debates we've had about, certain wrestlers who should or shouldn't be included in the PWI 500, some societal issues, some cultural issues. And then yet on the flip side, you're going to be at the helm of a magazine that is such an institution and is so steeped in history. And I think some level of nostalgia, right? I mean, wrestling fans are a nostalgic bunch, and I think nostalgia is a big part of Pro Wrestling Illustrated. So you can't go and overhaul it that it's not even recognizable to what it was. So can you talk a bit about that and finding that balance in terms of modernizing it, maybe making more relatable to younger fans while also holding on to those traditions?
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, you hit the nail on the head with that. We can't alienate people who have loved this magazine for years, and I'm one of them. And we have to respect tradition, respect the past. I mean, just from a practical standpoint, we have this massive archive of photos and things that we want to make use of that, and readers want to see that. So that is part of it. But on the other hand, I mean, the business is changing, the world is changing. I mean, for example, I'm a big fan of indie wrestling, Japanese wrestling, things that we've covered, but maybe weren't a huge part of the magazine. But we can't go and just pivot and then that's all the magazine does. That doesn't make sense from a lot of standpoints. But I think there's room to include more of that. Sorry, my throat gets a little dry when I speak a song. But I mean, I don't want to give too much away about the next issue that we're working on, but for example, I mean, we've kind of branched it out a little bit and covered some talent who maybe wouldn't have gotten coverage a couple of years ago. There's a feature story about a really prominent indie wrestler that's going to be in the issue. And when I say indie, I mean completely unsigned, but significant in that world. But the story is compelling, and I think our readers will appreciate it when we put that out there. That's really it. It has to be relatable. It has to be something that isn't going to be a complete left turn. And that's one thing I think the magazine has always done really well. Even if it's a wrestler who everybody knows, it's getting kind of beneath the surface and looking at the human being who is behind that I don't want to say behind the persona, but I mean, like there's a human element and there's an athletic element. And I think we've always done a really good job of balancing those. And I don't want that to go away. I think that's our bread and butter.
Stu, this has been your baby for so long. Is there any anxiety, any uneasiness handing this over to Kevin, who again has kind of a maybe different sensibilities, different vision for the magazine that you've had for all these years? I mean, do you wonder what becomes of this? Does it just look completely different than what I left him?
I don't think that's going to happen. I mean, if you're just listening to Kevin, I appreciate him so much just for what he just brought to the table just now. I mean, he totally gets it. He totally understands that there's a rich history to the magazine that needs to be tweaked, and we have over the years, and it can continue to be tweaked without destroying the traditional element that really brought our readers to us. And so I have total confidence that he's not going to just tear it down. He's perfectly entitled to. It's going to be his. I'm not going to be here. I'm only going to be here another couple of weeks. And, once I'm gone, all bets are off the table, but, I'll never speak to him again if he totally takes it and tears it down, which he might appreciate at this point. No, but I have total trust. And all the things he's saying is so true. Just the archives they're just sitting there, and we use them for, I think WWE and some of the other wrestling companies use them more than we do at times, which is not good. We should make them more accessible to our readers. It's a terrific resource for us. And I think Kevin he's already shown ideas and brought things to the table that allow us to utilize our archives in ways that I never would have thought of. So, he talks about what I have, what I, my knowledge and all that, but he brings something totally, entirely different to the table, things that I never would have thought of doing. And I think that's the overall, it's going to be a win-win for the magazine and for our readers. And I think I have the utmost confidence that he's going to continue to grow our readership. He's just, he thinks a little bit differently. He's got a little bit of a broader view of things than I do. He's got a really, really strong background in social media marketing. And that's one of the things that the company appreciates about him, because Kevin isn't going to just do for Pro Wrestling Illustrated. Kevin is going to do for the entire Kappa organization, and he already has. He's been in meetings that I wouldn't have been invited to because I would have had nothing to say. So Kevin has, he has something to offer all of Kappa, which is very, very appetizing for the powers that be here. So I see him having a very, very long and fruitful existence here at Kappa. I think it's going to be great for everybody.
Brian, you want to jump in? I mean, all your experience in wrestling magazines, and you've also been there when there's been these big kind of seismic shifts in wrestling magazines. Your take on the passing the torch here?
Well, again, just more on the theme of jealousy. I have to say that I wish that and this is really pulling back the curtain of Titan Tower, but I wish the transitions were as smooth and as amicable as what's going on here. Over there, it was more like, you ever see the Mirror Universe episode of Star Trek where they would talk about like how leadership would change over through like assassination, things like that. It was very different. I've been through that where there's regime change, and it was never pretty. It was never, sometimes I was on the winning side, and eventually I was on the losing side, but it was never done this way. I think it's beautiful. I think it's fantastic, because there has to be a recognition that the people that are moving out, or that were in charge, have something to offer. They have something valuable, and they can be learned from. And it's not just this thing of, let's just blow the whole thing up just for the hell of it, and just bring new people in just for the hell of it, and change everything around regardless of what readers are used to or what they might like, just change for the sake of change instead of intelligent change. And I think what I'm seeing here is exactly that. It's the intelligent change. It's doing it the right way. It's passing the torch in the right way, and not what I'm used to seeing, honestly. And it's very refreshing. So
it definitely helps. It definitely helps that Kevin has this, not only a background in wrestling, but a background with PWI in particular. And in your case, the people that were succeeding you had no background whatsoever in wrestling or WWE, and they had their own way of doing a magazine, and somehow I wasn't there, I wasn't privy to how it all came to be, but somehow they convinced the folks at WWE that this is the way to go with a magazine now, and it just didn't do it for me. They were very talented people. They put out a fantastic product if you like that kind of thing, but it didn't do it for me.
Yeah, what I saw was, after Barry left, in our case, I was sort of kind of unofficially running things for a while, just sort of because there was no one in charge. It was a rudderless ship. And I would have loved to have stepped in, but like you said, they had a totally different vision, and they brought in all these kind of like New York lifestyle magazine people, literally like Maxim magazine and Men's Fitness or something like that, and all this stuff. And they just turned it into a lifestyle magazine that just sort of tangentially had to do with wrestling. And like you said, those were guys that were not even wrestling fans. A lot of them honestly even had contempt for it. And they sort of kept me around to sort of ground them a little bit and keep it something that fans would remotely want to see. But it wasn't like, it was just a case of, like I was saying, just blowing things up and just trying to shake things up for no reason. And it wound up alienating a lot of readers, I think. And again, it's not like what we're doing here at all. I think this is the way that it should be done, really, just to make it something that fans continue to want to read and something you can be proud of kind of putting your name on, you know?
Yes.
Well, I mean, peaceful transfer of power aside, what you didn't see is we did have a boxing match. And,
Kevin, how long have you been with the magazine now?
13 and a half years, I think.
And what's your background? We haven't, talked that much about it.
It's all over the place. I will say that my first professional writing gig was a freelance article for the combination The Wrestler Inside Wrestling magazine. First piece out of college, about a year after, and more or less been contributing since. There was a short gap where I didn't, but I mean my work experience has been all over the place since then. I mean, I was in civil service for a while, but it's more recently been marketing, social media marketing, digital marketing. I wrote for television a little bit for a PBS show. So I mean, really, I think that in a lot of ways, what I've done and the skills I've picked up along the way are really benefiting me here. And they have, it sounds like I'm interviewing for the job. I have the job or keep doing that. But no, I really think it was appropriate because sometimes it felt like, well, I'm doing this and I'm doing that. And where is it all leading? Like, what's my career? Where am I going to end up that I feel good about it? And I think this is what it was supposed to be. I mean, even the social media marketing, the first time I did that, it was running PWI's Twitter with Mike Bessler and, and doing stuff on our Facebook. That was where I started, and that's what got my foot in the door. And then I started doing that, more formally with other places. But it's amazing how every part of my career and every part of my life to some degree, I mean, the magazine's been in the background somewhere, and then it feels really appropriate for me to be here.
Yeah. Everything kind of aligned.
Yeah. And I mean, I have a lot of stories here with, the first time I came into the office I think I thought I was interviewing for something, but there wasn't a job for me to interview for. It was more like Harry Burkett was editor at the time when I first came in, and he said, you should come in and meet everybody. And I did, and it was great. And then it's like, oh, but also there's not really, I did find out that there's not a job. I just thought maybe if there were a job at some point, you could. I'm like, okay, well that's a little disappointing, but I enjoy working with the magazine. Mm-hmm. But it was funny because I think I took a train and 2 or 3 buses to get here. It's geographically not far from where I grew up, but I was still living at home. I didn't have a car, so it was the only way I could get here. This was before Uber, before Lyft. Jeez, what else? I mean, I don't want to just rattle off every.
What's your commute now?
About 15 minutes.
Really?
Wow. Yeah. So it's really
everything worked out. Yeah.
Down to where my wife and I bought a home. I mean, truly everything was setting me up for this. But
yeah. Of course, that 15 minutes could turn into 30 when this all
yes
over. Yeah.
But I mean, even before it was about 20 minutes or so. It was really not too bad. I mean, and it's pretty great.
Yeah. One thing I thought would be fun again, and kind of maybe comparing two different generations, 2 different sensibilities, and also getting into each of your minds as far as wrestling goes is a couple questions about wrestling. And I think with Stu in particular, it's funny, you've been there 41 years, and I think most people would know some of this stuff. What is your favorite match you've ever watched?
You talking to me now?
Yes.
I would say this goes back to, I'm not sure if it's 81 or 82, and it was Tiger Mask versus the Dynamite Kid at Madison Square Garden.
Were you there?
I was there. Okay. And I wasn't shooting. I remember sitting in the stands. I had a ticket as a comp ticket for some reason, and Tiger Mask comes in with the WWF Junior Heavyweight Championship, and it's like, oh, that's nice, because nobody really thought much of that title at the time, and I had never heard of him. No, people really didn't. That was way before, Japanese wrestling was on the radar of American fans. I think there was no tape trading. There were no tapes. Maybe there was, but there was no. The tape trading thing really hadn't gotten started yet, and people didn't really know. So this guy comes in, and then I think, well, he's got to be good because he's the champion. So cool. Well, this other guy, the Dynamite Kid, he'd never been seen before. So I think, all right, I kind of gathered that he's the foil. He's the guy that's going to, he travels with the champion and he wrestles them everywhere, like the Washington Generals against the Harlem Globetrotters. And the match starts, and I was blown away. I'd never seen the types of moves, and it wasn't just from Tiger Mask. It was the Dynamite Kid also. And this guy was every bit as good, and it was like, holy crap, this is, what a match. I mean, people at the Garden, they were like, they didn't know what to do with themselves because they just never seen this type of style and athleticism in a match. You know, back in those days, you know, you throw 2-3 drop kicks and that was like, wow, that was really big stuff. These guys were all over the place. And I think that match had a huge impact on me as a fan, and I think on a lot of people. And it's, you know, you can still find it today on YouTube. It was spectacular. Even it holds up to this day for its athleticism and just brilliance. So that was fun.
How about you, Kevin? I'm guessing you weren't at that match.
I was not at that match. I was, what year was it? 81? I don't know if I was born. So I guess I have two. I'll try and be brief about them since there are two. The first is from when I was growing up was the WrestleMania 6 match with Hulk Hogan and the Ultimate Warrior, which I think we've even spoken about this match before. So I was a huge Hulk Hogan fan growing up. Warrior was great too, but Hogan was my guy, and I had this habit of rooting for the most obvious. Like my favorite player was always the best player on the team for any sport, you know, that kind of thing. I wasn't very creative about it, but Hulk Hogan, it was really just like a cathartic thing for me every time he took down the bad guy. So for him to have this match with Ultimate Warrior where neither was the bad guy, and then there's just this really emotional display, that I think that was one of the first times I saw like the classic handshake hug after the match. And even as a little Hulkamaniac, as hard as it was for me to see the ending of that match, I would watch it over and over and over again. Like, and I don't think I even understood why I did. Like I want to see it again. I have to rewind it, watch it again, even though it was emotionally hard for me to see the end of that match, you know, because I was pulling for Hogan so hard. So there was that. The other match would be a lot more recent, from TakeOver. I was looking it up while Stu was talking because I didn't remember the month that it happened. But April 2018, the Gargano Ciampa unsanctioned match, which is a very different kind of match. That came during a time when a lot of personal, family, professional stuff going on, just kind of a hard time in my life. But, you know, 2 years ago. And that match was just a really cathartic experience in a different way. It was sitting and watching that and realizing, wow, I forgot how much of an escape, even though I was watching wrestling all the time, how much it could really take you out of your own head and you could feel something. And everything in that match was just resonating with me perfectly at that moment. So that would be my other one, I think. But
yeah,
ask me again in 5. Oh yeah, it was terrific. That was in New Orleans, I believe. But
Yep, the night before WrestleMania.
Yeah. So, yeah, difficult call. If you ask me again in 10 minutes, I'll probably say something else for the second one. But
and I think that sort of tells the story here, right? You know, 3 matches, early 80s, early 90s, and then just sort of the last couple of years. I mean, talking about sort of bridging the generations here. Mount Rushmore of wrestling, that one comes up a lot. So why don't we hear what each of your Mount Rushmores would be? No parameters, no anything. Wrestlers, managers, promoters, whoever. Who are the 4 people on your Mount Rushmore?
Yikes. I have to start with Bruno. I mean, it begins and ends with him. He was my favorite wrestler and one of my favorite people as I got to know him. Just amazing. And he held the belt for, you know, like, I think it was 11 of the first 14 years of WWF's existence. So he'd be on there. How many do I get? That shows my lack of knowledge of history.
Oh boy.
Yeah, I didn't know this.
Somebody pull up a picture of Mount Rushmore.
Yeah, right.
I
believe it's 4.
Again?
4, okay. All right. I'd say Austin,
Stephen Campbell is a...
Sorry. Continue.
Ric Flair and I guess Andre.
So Martino, Austin, Ric Flair, Andre. Okay, interesting. And Kevin?
Yeah, this is really hard. I think I'm going to agree on Austin and Flair. And I think I'll go The Rock and Bret Hart.
No Hulk Hogan on either of your lists. It's interesting. Yeah.
Well,
And you got into the Hulkamania.
there's reasons for that. I mean, as a child, I felt differently.
Nor John Cena, which I thought maybe would come up, but with
It's, there's an argument. That's actually difficult.
It is very hard. They just have to make Mount Rushmore bigger.
Let's add a few more.
They could have 10 people on there. Very easy question, but
Yeah.
That's not our fault. That's their fault.
All right. I don't want to. It's so hard to say goodbye, Stu. So we don't want to let you go.
Let's go for 2 more hours.
I could do that. I gotta say thank you to several people, and some of them are on this podcast. All of them are on this podcast. You guys, I just have such a just a warm feeling for all of you. Like what you guys, I've already spoken about Kevin. What you guys have done with the podcast is just phenomenal, and I'd be remiss, if not mentioning Dan Murphy, who started the podcast with Al. I miss him tremendously. He was with us for I think 22 years. Just the most prolific writer in the history of Pro Wrestling Illustrated. I thank you all so much. I have to thank the owner of the company, Mr. Nick Karabatz, not just for providing me with a living for these last 25 years, but he kind of saved me, because there was a period of time he had sold Pro Wrestling Illustrated and Ring Magazine to Oscar De La Hoya, and then we all knew that Oscar had no interest whatsoever in the wrestling magazines. He just wanted Ring Magazine, and he took PWI because that was part of the deal. He had to. And 2 years later, he went to Mr. Karabatz and said, "Look, I only want the Ring. I don't want Pro Wrestling Illustrated." And he didn't understand wrestling. He didn't care about wrestling. And Mr. Karabatz said, "Okay, I'll buy that. I'll buy that back from you." He's a really, really good businessman. I'm sure he got himself a good deal, but part of it, and a strong part of it, was his feeling for me. I know that, and he wanted to make sure that I was taken care of. So he bought Pro Wrestling Illustrated back in 2009, and I've been here ever since. And the kicker to the story is 2 years after that, after 2011. The Ring Magazine was moved from an office here in Pennsylvania to California, and the Golden Boy people did not give the existing editors even the opportunity to come with them to California. So all these really, really fine people were out of a job, and I would have been one of those people. So I really have to express my thanks to Mr. Karabatz and my direct boss, Des McNulty. They saved me. So. Like I said in my column, I would have been writing this farewell column many years earlier if it weren't for them. So I really, really appreciate that. And just so many wonderful people who I've met through all the years of doing the magazine. I can't even tell you all the names. I leave somebody out. The current crop of people. The original, you already know who they are. But the middle group with Dave Lanker and Frank Cruda, these people were essential parts of the magazine, and they don't get talked about very often, but they were so vital to all the years that we've had, and I maintain friendships with all of them. I appreciate everybody, Dave Rosenbaum and Chris Bernuka and Bob Smith, and I'm going to get in trouble for leaving out very important people, but you know, there's just so many people who I've been in contact with for 40 years. It's just, I'll miss every one of them. And, you know, to this day, I miss them all that aren't here. There's only, you know, it's kind of weird to be in the office, even though Kevin is on the other side of the office, just to be working with somebody again. You know, it's always been for the last, I don't even know how many years, you know, like at least for the last 10 years, it's my only contact with wrestling people were via email. And, you know, to have somebody in the office I could talk to wrestling about is kind of a cool thing again, but it's not going to last much longer. So, you know, Kevin's on his own. You know, I'll take a call from you anytime. So, you know, please feel free.
Have you given any thought to continuing writing, maybe penning a column semi-regularly, I don't know, a book?
No, nobody would be interested in a book that I wrote. You know, you know, just for the reasons that you talked about earlier. I was the guy that was in the office most of the time. I didn't have the experiences that like a Bill Apter would, where he had a lot of interaction with the wrestlers. And that's what people want to read about. They don't want to read about some guy sitting in an office, you know, putting out wrestling and boxing magazines. It's, you know, you and I might find that interesting, and Brian, but, you know, for the average person, no, I don't think anybody's ever going to say to me, Stu, you got to write about a book about your experiences. You know, I think my column is just about as far as I'm going to go with that.
Do you imagine you're going to watch wrestling anymore?
I will flip it on. I will always keep track of wrestling. I will always see what's going on. I snuck in a comp subscription to Pro Wrestling Illustrated, so I'll continue to get the magazine. So I'm going to be watching, Kevin. But yeah, I will flip it on. I will keep track of what's going on. You know, it's sort of in my blood. You know, it all started back when I was 12 years old, and I was on a trip to Florida to visit my grandparents, and my grandfather was a huge wrestling fan, and he took me to the Miami Beach Auditorium to see wrestling. So we sat there and watched it, and I can't tell you, except for one person who was on the card, I can't tell you. I'd love to go back and find out the exact date that I was there to see who wrestled, but it was Sailor Art Thomas, and he was this big muscular guy, and, you know, he manhandled his opponent, and I was like, wow, this guy is great. I loved it, and I fell in love with wrestling, I think, at that point. So it's sort of in my blood. It was passed down from my grandfather to me, and so I'll always have an interest. I'll always keep track of it to some degree. I'll flip it on. I'll know who the champions are.
Yeah.
Yep.
Well, for my part, you know, I can't thank you enough for everything you've done for me professionally and personally over 13 years now. I picked up the phone one day. I was working in the office. You and I, the office you once worked at here in Long Island Media, and I think I emailed you actually, and then within minutes you were calling me, and we were talking on the phone, and you gave me that first writing assignment as kind of a test about Team 3D. I remember, and that was 13 years ago. And I think mine is similar to so many other people, my story, including Kevin, which is you grow up a fan, you grow up reading these magazines. They are sacred, right? I mean, I've got boxes and boxes of them in my attic, and for everything else I've accomplished professionally in my life, I mean, that's really sort of my pride, is that my name is in these magazines, and I always say that there's very little I have hung up on my walls from my own work in media over the years. And the two things I have, and they're right over here, is the first PWI 500 I worked on, framed up, and that story of Team 3D. And you know, I wouldn't have any of that without you giving me that chance. And beyond that, just a real terrific editor. And I've worked with dozens and dozens of editors over the years, and it takes a real special touch to do that well. And you were never shy about, you know, telling me the difference between an M dash and a hyphen. And I still don't know if I've got that one totally right, or just pointing out little stylistic things, or giving me the attaboy pat on the back, virtually, usually over an email or a phone call, and really mentored me, improved my writing. I'd like to think was a friend for all these years. One of my big regrets is that I didn't make that trip more than I did, certainly in the last few years. Those first few years, I mean, it was like absolutely one of the highlights of my year, driving for the annual PWI 500 meeting. And then over the years, we started doing that virtually more. I'll make a point to come visit Kevin more going forward. But again, I just, and having me to your home last year, meeting that lovely wife of yours and eating her delicious food. And after doing that and then hearing your retirement, it made me feel a lot better about it. I think otherwise I would have been totally depressed, but seeing what you have waiting for you at home made me get it, made me get your decision, and really feel happy for you that you get this opportunity.
Thank you.
So, and Kevin, I don't think he could have made a better choice. I think you're absolutely the right guy for the job. I think we see it already. Looking forward to many, many years with you. I do expect that you will be able to facilitate comp tickets as easily as Stu. Well, that's a very important part of the job. And I don't know, Brian, you have anything to add?
I do, actually, and this is something that I don't think I've ever had a chance to do, and I wanted to thank Stu because, you know, going back to when I was let go from WWE in 2007, one of the things for me was, you know, it had been a dream job for a long time because I loved writing about wrestling and I loved being inside that world and everything. The past couple of years were kind of rough, but I lost my voice, and it really kind of ripped me up that I didn't have an outlet to reach an audience about wrestling, because I loved doing that for years. And, you know, I was sort of, you know, out in the desert there for a while in 2007. And I got to thank Frank Fatucci, actually, because he made the introduction. He made the connection because he had worked for PWI before he came to WWE. And I forget how it came about, if he thought of it or I asked or whatever, but he made the introduction to Stu, and really just, I've been writing for PWI on and off whenever I can since then. And I want to thank you, Stu, because you gave me a chance to keep writing about something that I loved when I thought I was never really going to be able to do it professionally again. I was ready to just kind of give up on it. And you made that dream that I had kind of keep going. So thank you for that, really, seriously.
Well, thank you. And thank you for, I'm glad, like, two of the best decisions I've made over the 40 years were hiring Kevin, and then also bringing you back into a much more active role. And I think this really kind of goes hand in hand with what Kevin is able to do. And, you know, you doing the video editorials on the PWI Weekly. It's just awesome. You know, you and Al make just a fantastic pair on the podcast. And this is all really, really important to the future of the magazine, because it lets people know that PWI should not always be spoken of in the past tense. You know, it wasn't just the internet before the internet. It wasn't just how wrestlers got known in the 80s and the 70s. It's still a vital part of the wrestling business, I think. And, you know, by giving a voice to people like you, especially on the podcast, you know, you're telling people that, you know, the PWI you remember was all well and good, but it's still has a very important voice in the industry. And this is a sampling of what you could expect in the magazine as well. So, you know, by having, you know, your presence and Al's presence and Kevin's innovations to bring wrestling to a new media, it definitely brings fans back to the magazine, and it gives them a second look at it and say, you know what, this is still pretty good. And you know, I'm very proud of the magazine. I wish that we had the kind of readership that we might have had in the 80s, but I still see potential. You know, the print industry is a major challenge right now, but, you know, Pro Wrestling Illustrated, you know, our subscriptions grow every year. We're doing very well on that front. And, you know, I think that with the staff and the contributors that we have, it's just going to flourish into the future.
I think I should add to Stu. First of all, as Brian and Al said, thank you so much for not only trusting me to take this position over from you, which is the highest honor, but as I mentioned, you were the first person that gave me any kind of writing work out of college. If that hadn't happened, I mean, who knows? Might be miserable working a job I hate right now, and could not be more opposite. And I will say that, you know, with everything that's been going on, and I was at home for a while, and I mean, I think that was necessary for a bit until we figured out how to do this safely. You know, I was still just so happy to be doing this job and learning from you. But one thing I did say, I was like, you know, I mean, the world's a mess right now, but I'm so happy in a lot of ways. But one thing that really bums me out is I miss being in there with Stu every day and talking to him and catching up. And I mean, sometimes now even, you know, we're in different parts of the office. I'm making excuses to kind of go over your way because I want to catch up, you know, I mean, and we're standing at a distance, and I'll put my mask on when I'm over there. But it's been a real honor, and, you know, thank you again. And I just hope I make you proud.
Sure you will. You already are. You already are. So keep it up.
Well, before we all break down in tears here.
Yeah, it's close. Yeah.
Yeah. Stu, best of luck in all you do. Enjoy your retirement. Kevin, congrats once again. We'll be working together for the foreseeable future, I hope. And Brian, you and I will be back here on the podcast, I'm sure, before long, plugging away. Thanks, everybody, and we'll be back soon.
Bye-bye.